Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again to The Church Part 9. We're making our way through this series, although we've got a little bit of ways to go yet. I'm not exactly sure how many, but it'll be a number of different sessions yet to come. This will be Part 2 of the testimony of those who suffer. And I want to approach suffering from two perspectives today. First of all, the early church and the disciples in particular, and then succeeding generations with our current generation particularly in mind. And I want to read from Luke 21, verses 12 to 17. Jesus is speaking. He's giving clues and prophecies regarding the end times. In Matthew, he's looking ahead more specifically to the time that we know to be the tribulation, and then his approaching second coming and the beginning of his kingdom. In Luke 21, he gives more details relating to the disciples' generation and actually the destruction of Jerusalem. And he says, "Before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you utterance and wisdom, which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name." So that's Luke 21. Now in John 15:18, Jesus is teaching after the Last Supper. He's washed the disciples' feet. They are going to be going to the Garden of Gethsemane very shortly, and he's teaching them, and he says, "If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you." And later on in that chapter, in verses 26 and 27, he says, "When the Helper comes, the Holy Spirit, whom I will send to you from the Father, that is, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will testify about me, and you will testify also, because you have been with me from the beginning." And Jesus teaches here pretty clearly that the disciples should expect persecution to come, that it should not just be emotional, it shouldn't just be that people are making fun of them, but it would be very physical in nature, and some of them would die. And yet they were supposed to testify anyway. "He will testify about me, the Holy Spirit, and you will testify also." In Luke 21, he says it will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. Interesting. I'm finishing a course on apologetics, which is, as Webster's defines it, the branch of theology charged with the defense of Christianity. And we have very recently lost the most well-known current apologist, Rabbi Zacharias. And one of the apologists that I studied was Lee Strobel, and his book, The Case for Christ. And in that book, he examines the testimony of the disciples, among other things, but one section, he examines the testimony of the disciples and the fact that they died without retracting any of their statements about Jesus, that he was the Son of God, that he died for sins, and very importantly, that he had risen from the grave and that they had seen him. Why does this matter? They were the only generation who witnessed these things. Not the only people, but the only generation. And they were the only generation who could testify of the things that they saw. Every successive generation testifies of the things they have heard and chosen to believe. It has been said that no one will die for what they believe to be a lie. It does not mean that no one will die for a lie, because many have. Many have died for something they believe to be true, but it has been proven to be false, or has been believed to be false. And we would say that everybody who has chosen or been willing to die for a cult or for a false religion, well, their belief and their faith has been sincere, but has been misplaced. And they are sincere, but they are sincerely wrong. They have died in their faith, but their faith was wrong. But they did not see the things they had chosen to believe. In every case, they have read and chosen to believe. They have heard and chosen to believe, did not see. No one will die for what they believe to be a lie. And this is very important when it comes to a first-hand witness. I can hear and read that Jesus rose from the grave, and I can be willing to die for it and die. But I have no claim to be a first-hand witness. And so my faith comes from choosing to believe what I have read from those who claim to have been a first-hand witness. I can be sincere in my faith. I can be willing to die for my faith, but the possibility always exists that I have been duped and have believed a false report. But this cannot be said of the disciples. They did not report that others had seen Jesus. They reported that they had seen Jesus. And without exception, they all suffered for their testimony. It might be said that John was the only disciple to die of old age. But even if that's the case, he suffered greatly during his life. His life was not one of ease. He was not the one of the 11 left after Judas Iscariot committed suicide, who had an easy life and the other 10 suffered. No, he suffered greatly, and in fact was exiled on the island of Patmos. And it was not a holiday there. He was exiled there to work in the copper mines. He suffered greatly. But the fact that all of the disciples were willing to die for what they testified to as first-hand witnesses serves as a very powerful defense that they actually saw what they said they saw: Jesus risen from the grave. Their faith was based on sight. That's important. Their testimony was based on sight. The only ones. And so for them to be willing to die for their faith means that they saw what they said they saw. They believed that what they saw was true, was reality. And they were convinced in their minds. They were not trying to pull one over on anybody, because they would have recanted under torture, under the threat of death. And so we fast forward now from that generation all the way to ours. And I can say to you that the sacrifice and the suffering of the disciples was partly for my benefit, that my faith would be strengthened by their willingness to die for their testimony. Just consider for a moment that none of them suffered for their faith and all of them died of old age. Would that make their testimony untrue? No, not at all. But their testimony would not have endured the strongest possible attack. And so those who would want to be skeptical could find reason for it. But the fact that they did suffer, the fact that they did die for their testimony, becomes a very powerful defense for the validity of their testimony. So what about my testimony? Is it possible that if I were to suffer for the sake of the gospel, that could serve to strengthen someone else's faith? Maybe one of my children? Maybe one of my nieces or nephews? Maybe one of my grandchildren? Maybe someone who wasn't related to me at all? Someone in the church? Maybe someone I would never even meet. Remember Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." For a long time, I misunderstood the emphasis of this verse and the idea of such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. I used to think that while they're watching me, they're cheering me on, they're hoping I do well, they're encouraged by my faithfulness. But that's the exact opposite. They are not the audience. I am. And they surrounding me, they testify to me by their faith and by their faithfulness. They are the ones speaking, not me. And I listen to their testimony. I see their faithfulness. And I am supposed to be spurred on by that to faithfulness myself. And in effect, there comes a time where I become part of that witness, testifying to others. And my faithfulness and my testimony is supposed to be a challenge and an encouragement to others. And others are supposed to be spurred on by what they see in me. But which testimony is the most powerful? One that has never known attack? One that has never known challenge? A life that has never known struggle or difficulty? Or a life that has known all of those things and yet still remained faithful to the end? So I ask again, as I asked last time, who do you look to for strength and support when you are struggling? Do you look to the testimony of someone who has never battled anything? Or would you be more inclined to look to the testimony of those who suffered greatly and yet were faithful? And if that is the case, and I believe that is, then at what point does it transfer to us that we are supposed to be willing to suffer gladly and to endure, knowing that it will strengthen the faith of those who come after us? May those who come behind us find us faithful. But how will they know if our faith is never tested? How will they know if our faith is never challenged? May God give us the strength to endure, to do so gladly, because Jesus endured all things for us. We can never do more for him than he did for us. Let us not think that we have it hard, but let us look ahead with joy to whatever God would put before us. May God bless you, but above all, may he be glorified in your life today.